Send your scariest workplace stories to us at eeriecast.com/submit and rate and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Hey there. I've been halving my caffeine intake lately, trying to feel more sleepy come bedtime. But 10 shots a day just isn't enough, you know? By the way, I've got some new scary work stories that'll make you deathly afraid of dolls and guys named John. It's time for my break, so come on back to the lounge before I take a nap. These are Tales from the Break Room. Firefighter vs. Annabelle from Gevalt. I was a firefighter for well over a decade before deciding to change careers and becoming a high school teacher. Don't get me wrong, I loved being a firefighter. It gives a man a sense of purpose and the occasional adrenaline rush. But after a while, the toll it takes on your mind and body, well, let's just say I needed a change. But that's not what I'm here for. Rather, I'm here to tell you about the scariest thing I encountered while working as a firefighter. This story gives me chills to this day. Way back in my early years as a firefighter, in a small town just outside of Pittsburgh, we got a call around 2 a.m. about a house fire in one of the older neighborhoods. You've probably seen the type of house before. One of those big Victorian homes that's been standing there for over a century, with more creaks and groans than a retirement home. We arrived on the scene, and it was bad. The house was fully engulfed, flames licking out of every window on the second floor. The family had managed to get out safely, thank God, but they were frantic. The father kept screaming about his daughter's doll collection being trapped inside. Now, normally, there's no way in the world we would risk our lives for someone's possessions, but the fire had not reached the first floor yet, and the man was inconsolable. Apparently, these dolls were family heirlooms or something just as important. My coworker, Kenny, and I decided to do a quick sweep of the first floor to see if we could salvage anything. We entered through the front door, the heat intense even through our gear. The smoke was thick, but we could still see well enough to navigate. We made our way to what looked to be a study or a library. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and in the center of that room was a glass display case. Inside were dozens of porcelain dolls, their little faces illuminated by our flashlights. I've never been a fan of dolls. To me, there is something unsettling about their lifeless eyes and frozen expressions. But these were on another level. They were antique, probably from the early 1900s, with delicate painted features and elaborate Victorian-style dresses. In the flickering light of the fire, their shadows danced on the walls, almost like they were moving. Kenny started to carefully open the case, but I stopped him. Something felt wrong. The air in the room felt heavy, and I don't mean from the fire. It was heavy in a way that I can't explain. I just told Kenny we had to leave. The fire was spreading too quick. He argued for but a moment, and then we heard a loud crack from above. The second floor was beginning to break away. We turned to leave, and I saw it. One of the dolls, a little blonde thing in a blue dress, was facing the other way, but I could have sworn it had been facing forward when we entered, just like all the others. I blinked, convinced my eyes were just playing tricks on me in the smoke and heat. But then it moved. I swear it moved. Its head turned slowly, just barely, enough to reveal the side of painted blue eyes, and some of its little rosebud mouth curled up into a smile. I shook my head, once again convincing myself it was just the haze of the heat. Maybe I'd inhaled a bit too much smoke and didn't realize it, though considering the fire was above me, that didn't really make sense. Anyway, I yelled at Kenny to run, shoving him towards the door. As we sprinted from the room, I thought I heard laughing behind us. barely audible over the roar of the fire. But I didn't look back. We burst out of the house just as the second floor collapsed. The family was devastated about losing the dolls, but I couldn't bring myself to feel bad about it. Human life is more important than objects. Not to mention, something in my gut told me those dolls were better left to burn. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. It was very likely that the doll had not turned its head on its own accord. High heat, especially the more intense heat we may have been feeling, can warp matter, and obviously it can cause things to melt. Perhaps what I saw was a combination of those things, and maybe even some smoke had affected my vision. But at the back of my mind, I was scared that I was only making excuses. A week after the fire, I was off duty, having a drink at a local bar. An old man sat down next to me, ordering a whiskey and starting a conversation. Somehow, the conversation turned to the fire, and I mentioned the doll collection I'd seen. The old man's face went pale. He asked if I'd seen anything unusual about the dolls. I hesitated, then told him about what I thought I saw. I expected him to laugh, but instead he nodded in a grave manner. He then confessed something. "I do apologize, sir, but I'm not here by chance. I'm a bit of a collector, you see. I knew very much about the dolls in that house. I'd been in contact with the family about them. And after the fire, well, I wanted to talk to someone who was more open about them. When I heard that you were one of the ones who ran into the home, I decided I had to talk to you, in case you had seen them." He went on to explain that he knew about the original owners of those dolls, that he had studied them for quite some time. The original owner was a wealthy widow who lived in that home back in the 1920s. She had been known for her extensive doll collection, but also for her interest in the occult. There were rumors floating about that she had performed rituals with her dolls, tried to imbue them with spirits. According to local legend, the widow disappeared under mysterious circumstances. When the police searched her home, they found the doll collection, but no trace of the woman. Some of the dolls were arranged in a circle in the attic, surrounding a strange symbol painted on the floor. The old man leaned in close, voice dropping to a whisper. "Over the years, people who had come into possession of those dolls reported some strange things. Dolls moving on their own, unexplained giggles in the night, the feeling of being watched. Some even claimed to have seen the doll's eyes follow them about the room." I tried to laugh it off, but I felt rude doing so, and I felt a bit of denial too. The old man finished his drink and bid me good day, but he left me with a warning. Those dolls were not meant to be saved. Sometimes it's better to let the past burn. I'd like to say that was the end of it. A very strange set of experiences and encounters, right? I want to say I moved on and forgot about the whole thing, but life is rarely that simple. About a month after the fire, I began to have nightmares. I would dream I was back in that room, surrounded by those dolls, and in the dreams, they would all turn to look right at me. Their painted eyes coming to life, little hands reaching out. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that high-pitched giggle ringing in my ears. During my waking hours, I started to see flashes of things out of the corner of my eye, a glimpse of blonde hair, a swish of blue dress. Whenever I'd turn to look, there would be nothing there. But I still felt watched, even when I was alone in my apartment. It got to the point where I could not sleep. I was getting jumpy and irritable, constantly on edge. My performance at work started to suffer, and Kenny noticed. One day he asked what was wrong, but I didn't know how to explain it. How could I tell someone that I was being possibly haunted by a doll we'd left to burn? Things came to a head about 2 months after the fire. I was home alone, trying to distract myself with some TV, when the power went out. As I fumbled to find my flashlight or some candles, I heard it, an all too familiar high-pitched giggling sound. It reminded me way too much of what I'd heard in that fire. My blood ran cold. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the darkness, and there, at the archway to my kitchen, was a tuft of blonde hair attached to something that was hidden just around the corner. When I heard the giggle again, I'd had enough. I turned and booked it out of my apartment. I went to Kenny's. I had him come back to my place with me to check it over. But we didn't find anything. Thankfully, no trace of any blonde dolls. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I left firefighting for good because of that incident. Strange happenings died down, and life went back to normal a month or 2 later. Much later on, several years afterwards, I did quit, went back to school, and eventually went on as a high school teacher. While my official reason for quitting was the physical toll of the job, truth is, I never forgot about that experience. It was so bizarre, unexplainable, and terrifying that I literally was asking my family if we had history of mental illness. I was honestly thinking I was going schizophrenic. I'm thankful that these days it's a quieter life, but sometimes I'll lay in bed and think about the words of that old man, which will be my message to you. Not all fires are meant to be put out. Sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that survive the flames. Chipotle Hobo from CDBaez. We all know that fast food is bad for you, but working at a fast food restaurant is much worse. My daughter lived in Maine for a while, and she worked at a Chipotle. Let me tell you that Mainers love Chipotle. People literally line up from counter to around the corner to get their burritos, tacos, and quesadillas. To me, Chipotle is fine, but I wouldn't be standing outside to get some. It's not that good. Now, people don't know what Chipotle employees have to go through to serve them their Tex-Mex delights. My daughter has had third-degree burns from a hot water bin. A coworker of hers had lost the tip of a finger, and yet another had to get their eyes irrigated because of picante sauce. Maine isn't a place you would think of when you contemplate the homeless problem in America. However, it is an issue. My daughter attended Maine College of Art, and around her school and in and around her place of employment, there are panhandlers, homeless, and streetwalkers with varying degrees of mental illness and addiction. Thankfully, my daughter is street smart. Mama didn't raise no fool. But nothing could have prepared her for the man she encountered by the dumpster behind her job. Let me preface this by saying my daughter has always been sensitive to the supernatural. When she was little, she would have full-on conversations with people we could not see, and she would rock while she spoke to them. She was kind of a creepy kid. She was working the closing shift one night. She was about to take out the trash. "Be careful when you go out there," said one of her coworkers. "There's this hobo hanging about the last time I went out." "How?" asks my daughter. "Did he jump over the fence?" "I guess," said the coworker. "So just be careful." "No doubt," says my daughter, as she lugs 2 large trash bags out the door. It's a clear glass door with a clear view of the fenced-in yard, which contained the dumpster cage, which inside was the dumpster. The cage was padlocked. The purpose of this was to keep the critters out and prevent them from scattering the garbage all over the place. She carefully looked around, didn't see anyone out there, so she lugged the bags outside. "Hello?" she called out, just to make sure. Then she giggled to herself. She dropped the 2 heavy bags where she stood and went to open up the padlock. She was looking down at the lock, so she wasn't looking in when she opened the gate. She grabbed the trash bags and turned to toss them in, then let out a horrible scream. There, towards the back of the cage, was a well-dressed man, with a well-kept beard, spine bent back staring at the sky. She immediately started to shout for her coworker as she slowly backed away from the man. She never took her eyes off of him, and he did not look at her. That man was motionless. By the time her back hit the wall, her friend was at the door. She backed in and slammed it shut. "He's out there!" my daughter shouted. "The hobo?" asked the coworker. "Yeah." "Why are you so scared?" the coworker asked. "He's just some old man. Let's just give him some of the leftover food." "Oh," my daughter said. "Okay, you go talk to him while I bag up some leftovers for him." She didn't think her coworker was serious, but she went to bag up some leftovers immediately. The girls had not taken their eyes off the dumpster up until that point. It was an enclosed yard. The man could not have left without them seeing. By the time my daughter got back with the food, her coworker was standing in the yard, hands on her hips. "Not cool, Clara," said the coworker. "Are you screwing with me? We got a lot of work to do." "What are you talking about?" asked my daughter. "He's over there in the cage." "There's no one in there," said the coworker. My daughter went out to look, and there was no one there. Her face flushed red hot. Was she going crazy? "I'm not lying," she shouted. "He was right here." Her coworker saw how shook she was and patted her on the back. "He was so skinny, maybe he squeezed through the gap in the fence." My daughter nodded, even though she knew that was not the case. She had been seeing things like this her entire life, but she still had something to prove. She was an artist in art school, after all. She made a quick sketch of the man she saw and showed it to her coworker. "Girl," said her coworker, "that's a cute old man, but he looks nothing like the hobo in the dumpster. The hobo I saw was mad skinny and dirty. You probably didn't see him clearly because he was behind the dumpster." "You're probably right," she admitted. Months went by, and she kept on seeing this man. Every time he startled her, she would stifle her scream. She had been called crazy a time or two in her life because of the things she saw. But she needed that job. She began to anticipate him every time she went out back. That's when she noticed he was angry. So one day she asked, "What is it you want?" His lips moved, but no voice or sound came out. One time he was standing on top of the dumpster, looking down at her with a confused look on his face. Another time he was outside the cage, pointing up to the sky and crying. The last straw was when she saw him in front of the door looking at her. She was afraid he would come in if she didn't do something. She went to see a Santeria priest who gave her a reading. "He's trying to get someone else's attention," said the Babalawo. "If he wanted to get your attention, he would have spoken to you. He is mad and sad that you noticed him, but he did not want to scare you." "So what do I do, Baba?" my daughter asked. "Let me see your drawing." She handed it to him. He took the drawing and placed it on his altar. Then he prayed. "The man is looking for someone who works there. Do you know anyone who resembles him?" "I don't know everybody who works there. I only work the night shift. I'm in school all day." The Babalawo closed his eyes and bowed his head, breathing in deeply before saying, "Put this picture by the back door with your name and phone number, with a message saying, 'If you know him, call me.'" So that is what my daughter did. Not 2 full days later, she received a call from a number she did not recognize. She picked it up right away because she had a feeling it was about the dumpster hobo. "Hello?" she said. "Speak Spanish," the voice on the other side said. I've translated their conversation to English for this story. "Yes, I speak Spanish. Who is this?" I am Guillermo. I saw your drawing and it looks just like my papa. Are you Guatemalan? No, I'm from Puerto Rico. I think I saw your father in the back of Chipotle. No, you didn't. My father died 2 months ago in Guatemala. He's dead. The man began to cry, and my daughter realized it had been about 2 months since she first saw the man. Look, sir, I don't know what to tell you. I've been seeing this man in the back of Chipotle, and he's scaring the crap out of me. You have to do something. That night, my daughter met up with Guillermo at Chipotle, and he explained how he was trying to bring his father to the US. His father did not want to come. He would never leave Guatemala. He told her about their last conversation. He said to me, "Come home, Guillermo. Your familia need you." And I said to him, "Papa, I'll save up money, and I'll come home and build a house for our family." But he said to me, "You are dead to me." And he never spoke to me again. Tears were streaming down his face. My daughter hugged him. "No," he said. "When they told me my papa died, I went back there, and I yelled at him, why did he die? Why did he not speak to me? I was so mad." "Guillermo," my daughter said, "your father is mad. I went to see a babalawo, and your father wants you to see him. He's getting mad at me because I see him, and you haven't. You have to go out there and talk to him." "Go," she said, pushing him towards the door. Guillermo slowly went outside and looked around. I guess he expected to see his father standing there the minute he walked out, but he didn't. My daughter heard him running around and shouting, "Papa, Papa!" He slammed open the back door and started to yell at my daughter. "You lied to me," he said over and over. My daughter's manager pushed him away from her and told him to get out. As far as anyone knows, Guillermo never returned to that Chipotle, and my daughter kept seeing the angry old man. She was really getting scared. She was feeling his anger more intensely now, so she went to see the babalawo again. "The man doesn't want anyone to see him," said the babalawo. "So, don't notice him." "How do I do that?" she asked. "Can you quit your job?" he asked. "I need that job." "So don't go back there. Don't go into the backyard." From there on out, she refused to take out the trash due to anxiety, and if she saw him through the door, she pretended not to see him for the remainder of her time there. She graduated, going on to bigger and better things. Thankfully, she never saw the dumpster hobo ever again, and he did not follow her. I think he was angry because his son's grief pulled him from Guatemala after all, and now he's stuck in the back of a Chipotle in Maine. I wonder if anyone else has seen him, and if he's okay with it. Poor guy. Incident at a new job. From ItsDaemonic. This story takes place at a new job I've recently started. Obviously, to keep with the social media clause of my work, I won't get into too much detail of the location or people involved, especially due to how recent this occurred. I worked as a delivery driver for 2 years. I'd recently landed the best gig of my life so far. Earlier hours, a great schedule, and the people I've met have been fantastic. Customers genuinely value the service we provide, and I'm always happy to help them out, giving them what they need. Right now, I'm still in training, which takes about 3 months to get through. In comparison, my last job sent me on the road in my 2nd week alone, saying, "Good luck." As I train, I ride with a qualified trainer and help them on their route. This sometimes means they get done with their day earlier, and as it's a salary gig, that's fine by us. The previous Monday had been a holiday, so my coworker and I went from working our normal Monday through Thursday to a Tuesday through Friday schedule. We'd grown accustomed to our normal schedule, and neither of us wanted to be out late on a Friday. So we both agreed to get in early, get our work done, so we could head out and get a head start on the weekend. As our job primarily entails servicing businesses, we had to adjust our delivery schedule since not all the customers would be there to let us in early. However, there are some places that have workers inside before they officially open, as well as places that have given us keys and access cards to get inside in case they aren't around to let us in. When we got on the road, we were making judgment calls as to which of our stops would be open. It was 5 a.m. Only a few factories and other related businesses were open at the time, or available for us to service. Every stop we made after that was solely just us walking up and seeing if anyone was around. We didn't run into any problems, and we were well on pace to get it done and over with by or before 1 p.m. At about 8:30 a.m., we pulled up to a restaurant that we knew had workers in there before they officially opened at 11 a.m. The back door was cracked, which wasn't unusual for a kitchen access door, especially on such an unusually cold day for May. We got out of the truck, collecting the items and products listed on the invoice, and we started to head in. My trainer had me go first, as he had forgotten to grab something they'd asked for in the previous week. Now, admittedly, I had a headphone in. At such an early hour at the end of the week, we typically do not end up seeing many of the customers, and I wanted to listen to some music while I worked. This is something my company would not approve of for a number of reasons, and it's something I probably won't ever do again due to the events that unfolded after I'd entered the building. Our company is big on working as quietly and as effectively as possible to ensure we do not interrupt or interfere with the customer's business, so I did not announce myself when I walked in. Rather, I immediately went in and headed straight to the restaurant stockroom to replace and add product where needed. As I turned in towards there, however, I froze in my steps because I'd heard screaming for help coming from the kitchen. My blood froze. I quickly ripped out my earbud and fell to my knees as I accidentally dropped it and was too shocked to catch it. Rather, I ended up slapping it further away from me. I turned on the spot and saw splashes of red all over the floor. Blood. As anyone will tell you, a restaurant's kitchen is loud. Everything in there makes noise, and most places play music for their workers to enjoy while they work. However, despite the cacophony of noise occurring, I could hear plain as day someone calling for help, pleading to stop, that they were going to kill him, over and over. My stomach lurched. What in the world was going on? Had someone broken in? Did they have a weapon? I quickly darted back to the kitchen door just in time to meet my trainer. We've really only known each other for 3 weeks at best, but he could tell by the way I was acting that something was wrong. Before he could say a word, I covered his mouth and told him to call 911, that somebody was being attacked. I then pushed him back from the door and away in case whoever was in there was going to come out to meet us. I love horror, especially in horror films, but I always hated the scene where the characters go back inside the house where the killer is. What an idiotic and unreasonably stupid way to die. What could you hope to do? Unfortunately, I was that guy in that moment. I didn't have a thing to protect myself with, and I had no real plan of action, just an idea of where they were and a hope that I could get a better understanding of what was going on to inform law enforcement. I crept down the hall, passing the stockroom, and I slowly peeled around the corner into the kitchen. The screams were only louder, and sounds of a struggle were continuing to play out. I could barely see the people involved, but it was enough to probably stick with me for the rest of my days. Against the dishwashing station were 2 men, one older, the other younger. The younger one was pummeling into the older man like he was trying to erase what was left of the poor guy's face. There was a woman, presumably the one who had alerted us, who tried to intervene, but sadly she'd gotten her share of the assault and was now sobbing on the ground. All three looked to be workers at the restaurant. The older guy, or rather the victim, was no longer fighting back. There was blood everywhere. His face looked like busted up meat, and not much else. I thought I was going to vomit. Sweat was pouring down my face and neck. I wasn't even sure what to do. As soon as I managed to barely move, I heard sirens outside. I realized I was in the only unlocked exit, as the front of the store was to be locked for another 2 hours. And if this psycho decided he wanted to leave, he would come barreling straight at me. I darted and ran towards the exit, willing my legs to make it to the door to alert the cops of where he was. Thankfully, as I got outside, hands in the air, the cops were already speaking to my coworker and heading towards the back door. After successfully being able to convey and convince the officers that I wasn't involved, I told them what I could piece together. They ran inside to arrest the guy, as I told them he didn't have a weapon immediately on him, and I promptly vomited into the dumpster. After the cops had arrested the guy, EMS had carted off the woman and the victim of the brutal beating. I swore after seeing him that he had to be dead, and I guess I haven't heard yet if he is or isn't, but I know he's never going to look the same. We found out from the cops that woman was the manager, who just happened to have called the cops before we even got there. Evidently, the older employee had made a passing joke to the younger man that he was taking too long on something, and he apparently decided he'd had enough of the criticism. He was a troubled person, a previous felon that had spent a long time in jail, and was hired under the agreement he would be under a watchful eye. When I had darted out, he had the older guy's mouth onto the prep table's edge and was about to give the ending blow. The older man was apparently still able to verbally communicate and had asked repeatedly who was going to make the bread for the restaurant that day. Anything else he had said was apparently not understandable. This was haunting, to say the least. I spent all that weekend disgusted with not only my own inability to help, but the horror of seeing such a sight. I love my job, but only time will tell if this will cause me to seek other employment. Life after John. From Anna. I worked part-time in my local cinema while attending university, and I stayed on full-time after graduation because I didn't know what else I wanted to do. When I was 23, I met John. John became an overnight regular at our cinema, and by regular, I mean he would drop by at least 4 days a week. He was a little awkward, but he seemed harmless. He had some quirks. He sometimes overshared, bordered on inappropriate when he spoke to the employees, and he sometimes came in just to eat food and sit in the foyer without seeing a movie. John was around 40 with a very short and basic haircut, starting to recede actually. He had very intense pale eyes, which I found intimidating to look at for too long. Most notably, John was a very large man. He was maybe 6'5", but it wasn't just height that gave him his bulk. He was as broad as he was tall. His head was large and his hands were like dinner plates. After seeing John almost every shift for a month, I learned why he had suddenly shown up at our location as if from thin air. His previous regular cinema, a branch from our company in a town about half an hour away, had banned him for inappropriate remarks to an employee. I think it's important to note here, John seemed to have a mild intellectual disability of some kind. It was something we just picked up in our daily interactions with him, so it was possible his words had no malicious intent. He hadn't done anything in our branch except act a little weird, so we figured we could give him a clean slate. I had my first uncomfortable interaction with John when I was scheduled on the ice cream and sweets counter, across the foyer from the main retail counter and ticket machines. This area was typically quieter, meaning they'd staff it with fewer people, and it was easier for John to corner whoever was alone there for one of his forced social interactions. After a rush, I had to fix the sweets display. Someone had dropped a whole load of chocolates on the floor. I crouched on the floor to sweep up the chocolate when a shadow suddenly cast over me and half the display. At the same time, two enormous hands slapped down on my shoulders. I flinched and yelped, which caused the hands to retreat, but not before they had already pushed down on my shoulders and almost caused me to lose my balance. I spun around in my weird crouch position to see what I already knew would be there. John. When I turned, my knees hit his legs. He had been that close to me. I stood up, alarmed and feeling violated. Before I could scold him or ask what he thought he was doing, I saw he looked apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Anna," he said, his gigantic hands flying up in front of him. "I didn't mean to scare you." I replied with a simple and firm, "You can't approach people from behind and just touch them, John." He nodded almost violently. "I'm sorry, I won't." I scanned his face and he seemed genuine, so I took several steps away from him and continued to clean. He then launched into 1,000 questions, starting with my favorite drink. I told him it was Dr. Pepper. A week went by and John approached me when I was on the retail counter with 3 other people. It became obvious he was stalling at the front of the line until my till was free. When my colleague tried to serve him, he pretended he had just caught sight of some bagged snacks that greatly interested him. He loitered around, slowly wandering towards my till, until I finished with a gasp and he exclaimed, "Oh, well, I'm next in line, so..." He ordered food, and while my coworker got his order ready, he fixed me with a look that I can only describe as sickening. It was the strangest and most uncomfortable way a man has ever looked at me. It was half someone staring at a celebrity they just met in real life, and half schoolboy looking at the first grown woman he's ever found attractive. It turned my stomach. After my coworker sat his order down, she left to make the next person's order. John took the opportunity. "I like you, Anna," he said. My stomach clenched. Thank you, John," I said. I was very careful not to say, "I like you too." Instead, I said, "We all like seeing you when you come in." "Would you like to be my girlfriend?" he asked. "Thank you, John, but no. I think we're better just as work friends." He seemed to take a second to evaluate this. Then he stared at me for just a little too long before nodding and walking away. I thought he would distance himself from me after this, but I couldn't have been more wrong. I began to notice John watching me during busy periods when I was scheduled on the retail counter, and after I noticed it once, I couldn't stop noticing it. On the days I was an usher, that is, the people who cleaned the screens in bathrooms, I would turn a corner and be face to face with him, or I would enter a screen and find him still sitting there after the lights went up. It was like he wanted me to tell him to leave before he would actually leave. I'd often come back from a break and see him watching the CCTV feed that displays on a monitor at the ticket checkpoint. These feeds showed inside each of the screens, so if something goes down during a screening, the person on the ticket checkpoint can radio for managers or security. They're pretty boring 99% of the time, and I can't imagine why anyone would want to watch them for more than a passing second. But I'd find John intently looking between all the screens on multiple occasions. Part of me started to wonder if he'd noticed my absence from the floor and would then check to see if I was cleaning somewhere. The wall this display monitor is mounted on is a small round hidden room that we use to store trash bags and anything else we want to hide from guests, but retrieve quickly when it's cleaning time. We call this little room the drum. One shift, I opened the door to retrieve some chemical cleaning spray, and I found John inside the drum, examining the wiring of the CCTV monitor from the back. I yelped in fright. Not only was I not expecting anyone to be in there, but this was a staff-only area, which John knew. Before I could say a word to him, he said, "Oh, hi, Anna," with a smile, like he hadn't realized that what he was doing was wrong at all. I backed up immediately and he slipped out of the drum, casually walking back to the foyer. By this point, I'd grown suspicious of his cheerful, innocent demeanor. I didn't know how to raise the point with others without sounding offensive, so I'd kept it to myself. But I had begun to suspect John was a lot more mentally sound, more capable and cunning than we'd given him credit for, and he was using the guise of a mental handicap to get away with bending the rules and doing inappropriate things. John was now passing up opportunities to corner my coworkers when they were scheduled to the ice cream and sweets area. All it took was a busy rush, and suddenly the ice cream person was alone at the counter, held captive serving one guest at a time, while the other areas were too busy to lend a hand. John quickly learned this, but would only target this area when I was that lonely, isolated person. If it was anyone else, he would ignore them in favor of watching me across the foyer or would appear outside screens I was cleaning. I'm aware that so far this doesn't sound too scary, and could be written off as just a run-of-the-mill weirdo. That's how I saw it too, for a while. He asked my coworker if we were hiring, and unfortunately she told him that we were. John asked for an application and he took great joy in telling me he would be working with me soon, including the rather alarming line, "I can see us now, closing together, all alone in this big building until the early hours." I told one of our supervisors about the comment, and while he did look slightly troubled, he admitted that it was not a bannable offense. He did assure me he would not hire John. John started submitting his CV to us every couple days, whether we were hiring or not. He seemed to know he would never get an interview, but enjoyed watching the staff squirm while trying to come up with a reason he hadn't been called yet. A few nights after the creepy comment, I was waiting on a taxi by the side exit of the building, when a car suddenly turned on their engine and high-beam headlights, blinding me. They idled there, bathing me in this overwhelming white light, until I grew so uncomfortable I had to duck inside the building again, waiting for my taxi with the door slightly cracked open so I could listen out for it. When I heard the aggressive revving of an engine, I peeked outside. The headlight-blaring car was the culprit, but my taxi had also pulled up to the curb. Whether the roaring car was revving his engine to make me come back outside, or to disguise the sound of my taxi and keep me inside, I don't know. I have no proof it was John. After all, he told us about his lengthy bus rides to our location, and didn't ever tell us he had a car, or that he was even capable of driving. But it was such a strange, aggressive move that I couldn't shake the feeling it was him. A few nights after the car incident, I was closing again. On my last trip of the night to the locker room to collect my things and clock out, I noticed a large bag of pick and mix candy sitting on a bench in the locker room with a note attached to it. I figured it was going to be a freebie from a supervisor or something. But as I reached for the note, one of the girls I was closing with came in. "Oh, you got them." This distracted me. I turned to ask what she meant. "The sweets," she replied, nodding towards the bag. I turned back to the bag and read the note. In chicken scratch, it read, "To Anna, I know these are your favorites. I'll see you soon." My blood ran cold. I opened up the bag to see that it contained only strawberry cables, my favorite from the pick and mix selection. I had never told John about my favorite sweets. In fact, I never told anyone else while he was in earshot. The only explanation was that he had watched me so often, times I was unaware of, as well as the times I'd known about, that he had picked up on this. I put them in the bin and told my coworker not to accept anything from John. I was on shift as an usher one quiet weekday. Most people were out in the sun, not indoors seeing a movie. I was busying myself with tasks like checking bathrooms that nobody had used in hours. I was in the ladies' room, cleaning around the sinks. When I looked up, like a freaking horror movie, I see John in the mirror standing behind me in the bathroom doorway watching me clean. I screamed and leapt around to face him. My paper towels fell to the floor. This time I didn't chastise him for scaring me. I couldn't. My voice was caught in my throat with the realization that he had cornered me in an empty bathroom. My mind started to race, wondering how likely it was that the staff on the food counter would hear me if I screamed. How long would it take them to run in here? "Did you enjoy the strawberry cables?" John asked. I felt my stomach drop to my feet. The way he spoke was completely different to his usual voice. It wasn't just the tone, the pitch, the volume that were different. The cadence of his words was different too. In fact, his entire posture was different, down to the micro-expressions flitting across his face with every syllable as he eyed me. It chilled me further when I identified the reason for my discomfort. All indications of a mental disability appeared to be gone. His eyes were cold, his words carefully considered and delivered in a cool tone that almost challenged me. As if to say, "Go on, tell your colleagues I'm faking my disability. I dare you." My mind snapped back to our current interaction as I felt sweat start to stain under my arms. "I enjoyed the sweets, thank you." Liar. He practically spat before I'd got the full sentence out. I swallowed. "What do you mean?" I tried to keep my tone even, consistently peeking behind him at the doorway, trying to calculate if I could dart under his arm or around him somehow. "They're my favorite, like you said. Why wouldn't I eat them?" "Why are you lying to me, Anna?" he asked. A small, irked smile crept onto the corners of his mouth. "You didn't eat those cables." How would he know that? Just as I was about to continue to argue, a woman, another guest, said, "Excuse me," behind John. He flinched just the tiniest bit and slipped back into the costume of the man he'd led us all to believe he was, like it was a comfortably fitting suit. Before turning to face the woman, his expression melted into the John mask he presented to the world. Bumbling, socially awkward, and most importantly, harmless, without a shred of malicious intent. He fumbled a perfectly rehearsed, "Sorry, Anna, I'll talk to you when you're done," and shuffled his way past the intruder with a freaking wave, like he was a child meeting Mickey Mouse at Disney World. The guest appeared to buy it too. When she clocked his face, her own expression softened, and she offered him a soft, pitying smile. I had told another supervisor about this, and she seemed dismissive, like she genuinely bought his act and thought he had wandered into the bathroom after me to conduct a conversation, not realizing it would scare me. I felt tears well up as I registered the fact she was listening but wasn't really hearing me. She said she could have a talk with him, but that thought panicked me even more, so I begged her not to. In the next 2 weeks, there were 4 more incidents, eventually culminating in him being mercifully trespassed from my workplace. A girl I closed with offered me a ride home so I wouldn't have to wait on a taxi. She knew about the car headlights incident. Within 2 days, her car had a smiley face carved into the paintwork with some sort of sharp implement. There was no CCTV coverage of where she normally parked, so we had no proof it was John. A coworker handed me a large Dr. Pepper in the middle of a busy day, saying my dad had bought it for me and given it to her to pass along, so he didn't interrupt me at work. A few of the other full-time staff, who knew how intense the John problem had become, explained it to her, and we dumped the Dr. Pepper down the sink. That day, my manager, after comforting me while I shook and cried in the office, sent out an email to all our staff to make them aware about not accepting any gifts from John. He told me he would ban John the next time he came in, after any minor excuse to do so. That opportunity presented itself soon. He came in to see a movie, and we all watched him like vultures, playing whispers behind his back to make sure everyone was aware they were to do everything short of compiling a written report of his movements. He had only been in for an hour or so when a supervisor slinked from the back office with a sense of urgency, which I'd never seen her move with before. I tracked her as she power-walked from the office, behind the ticket checkpoint, and out of my view down the corridor towards the staff room. It turned out John had slowly wandered down the corridor until he got to the very end, where you find the large emergency exits leading to an area we call the racetrack, a large looping corridor around the entire unit that allows people to quickly exit the building in the event of a fire, without having to double back through the main shopping center. There's often a large cardboard movie standee at the end of the corridor, which staff use to hide trash bags before we take them down to the main store through these doors. It's right beside the door to the staff locker room. John had crouched on the ground, hidden from the cameras and the view of anyone in the corridor by the large cardboard standee, and seemingly waited right opposite the secure code entry staff room door. My supervisor had even seen him check his watch a couple of times. For what, I don't know, and I don't like to put much thought into it. My supervisor confronted him and banned him on the spot. The fourth and final incident would come after a week of blissful peace following John's ban, and would involve an early morning call to the police. Our paltry ban became a very real trespass order. I was on an early usher shift. One of the opening responsibilities I had was to conduct screen checks, basically making sure there's no mess still to be cleaned, and that all fire doors and lights were working. Checking the fire doors involves pushing the door open all the way to make sure it's not blocked, and looking left and right down the racetrack to check for obstructions. These checks are inherently creepy. The screens are perfectly silent, eerily dark and still, and the fire escape racetrack is an industrial, empty, and freezing cold space. The last thing you would expect when you push open a fire door at 8 a.m. to the bowels of a shopping center is a person standing a few meters away in the middle of the cold silence. But that's what I saw. I gasped when I saw him. I knew it was John even before he managed to whip around and face me. He couldn't open any fire door from the racetrack side, and the foyer shutters were still down at this time, so he would not be able to get to me if I closed the door in time. He began to approach, and he broke into a jog when he realized my intention was to pull the door shut. A darkness passed over his face then. I yanked the door shut by the large bar and felt it click, just as he thumped against it on the other side. I told the shift manager, and she immediately called the police, who found John still loitering in the racetrack. He had stayed in this staff-only emergency area knowing we'd likely called the police. The level of confident arrogance angered me. We learned he had likely convinced the cops, with his carefully crafted ruse of being disabled, based on the fact they suggested he might not have known he was doing anything wrong. They explained the trespass order to him and walked him out without incident. 2 months went by. Life without John was peaceful, and I was getting to the point where certain work activities didn't make me sweat anymore. One morning I was scheduled on retail, and a security guard for the main center told me one of our deliveries was waiting at the side entrance. Our stock delivery wasn't due for another 2 hours, and the person scheduled to take it in wasn't starting for another hour. I asked the guard if he could see the delivery truck and verify that it was carrying pallets of cinema stock. He confirmed it was. It was waiting right by the entrance our deliveries came through. I sighed and asked the other coworkers to cover for me while I went to greet the driver and sign for the stock. As I exited the service elevator, rounding the corner into the corridor, the driver was already pushing the first pallet inside. "Thank you," I called out as I made my way down the corridor towards them. They moved back from the pallet and pulled the security doors closed. I thought this was strange, as there were more pallets to bring in. So why would they shut the door like that? I felt all the breath leave my lungs when the delivery driver moved around the pallet and into my view. previously obscured by the pallet, which was stocked several inches above head height. I now saw that I stood around 5 meters from John, in the uniform of the company who delivered our stock. He stared back at me, his face expressionless and haunting. I wondered if it was his version of camouflage. If he didn't let me see what he was feeling, I might not think he had bad intentions. "Hello, Anna." His greeting was sinister, gleeful, and victorious. Not at all the repentant or cautious hello of a changed man who regretted what he'd done in the past. My legs snapped into survival mode, and I turned on my heel and ran back up the corridor without consciously thinking about it. I knew I couldn't depend on the service elevator to close its doors in time, so instead I flew at the code entry security door. I was able to wrench the door open and slip through into the ground floor of the main mall. John reached the door with arms outstretched just as I yanked it shut, and he met my gaze through a small rectangular glass pane. He practically foamed with rage as he slammed his fist into it. I watched him look to his left at the service elevator, which would take him directly to the second-floor cinema racetrack. He disappeared from view at the same time as I bolted for the stairs. We raced each other to the second floor, and I beat him by only seconds. I heard the door to the racetrack swing open, and he advanced. "Anna!" he yelled as he thundered after me. I screamed to the retail workers to call the police as I streaked through the foyer, sprinting past the ticket checkpoint and down the corridor to the right. I made it to the break room and punched in our code like only muscle memory would allow. I heaved open the door and threw myself inside. As I did, I saw him gaining ground and snarling like a rabid beast, utterly infuriated that I dared run from him. The staff room door was heavy and fireproof, so pulling it shut was easy and quicker than the last door. John was not about to get in without breaking it down with a heavy-duty weapon. I had to reassure myself of this several times through my sobs as the door violently thumped with his efforts to get at me. I would later be told he was alternating between planting his foot against it with firm kicks and throwing his entire body against it shoulder first, screaming the entire time. I'd realized that I'd come to the closer room, the break room, rather than the locker room, which meant I was not in the same location as my phone. A quick look around confirmed there was no spare radio in here either. I would just have to sit and wait this out. The police arrived uncharacteristically quickly, given the unhinged nature of the attack and the number of people who heard it. I'd come to learn he had fled in his work truck, leaving thousands of pounds of our merchandise strewn across the car park. John was apprehended, and he pled guilty to criminal harassment and stalking. His plea meant I was spared a trial, which I was grateful for and surprised by, considering how much I knew he longed to torment me. But I soon figured out the motive behind taking a plea was the sentencing leniency. For all the trauma John had caused me over a period of around a year, he was given a course of anger management classes and ordered not to contact me or shop at the complex where I worked. Meanwhile, I was handed a lifetime of terror, PTSD triggered by minor everyday occurrences, and was forced to uproot my life. Speaking of, John's final hurrah was almost my undoing. I came home from a shift one day, about 8 months after his case was concluded, to find a bottle of Dr. Pepper and a bag of strawberry cable sweets on the front doorstep of my home. Since then, I've moved houses. I started dating an old coworker who lives with me now, and I've started a new job in a place John has no reason to visit. There have been no more incidents. I am 90% sure he's either found somewhere else to frequent, or he's finally done something to land himself in prison. But it doesn't stop the cold fear that freezes me when I see a large, balding man, or a certain mall layout, or a particular type of fire door. I'm working through it in therapy, but it's not been an easy road. I don't even have any advice for people who find themselves in this situation, because I did nothing to invite it. I just have to say good luck, be cautious, and I'll say that I'm thankful to still have a life after John. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room, the home of the scariest true work stories. If you want to hear your story narrated by me, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. We pay 5 cents per word for accepted stories. Help us grow by leaving Tales from the Break Room a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Check out eeriecast.com or search for EerieCast on those very same podcast apps to see our other exciting and terrifying podcasts, like Unexplained Encounters, the other show I host, where I read stories with a focus on the supernatural. To get some merch, go to eeriecast.store. And to unlock ad-free episodes of your favorite EerieCast shows and exclusive audiobooks, go to eeriecast.com/plus and consider signing up for EerieCast Plus. You can follow me on Twitter, I guess it's X now, at Prevails. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube, where I deliver the same content. Just look for Darkness Prevails. Good night. I hope we can share another break sometime soon.